All right, so Palo Kung Fu. This is a rinse and repeat talk I did 3 years ago about Palo Alto. We're going to talk a lot about how to take and use a darknet, and we'll talk about what that means. But first of all, my name's Jeremy Cox. If you don't know me, I'm Super Tech Guy. I'm the Director of Technology, or the CTO, for Washington County School District. Supertechguy.com is where you're going to find this training at the end. I have not posted it there yet. It will be there probably tonight. So if you want the slides, you'll find them there at supertechguy.com/training. And all of the slides for every presentation I've done here at SAINTCON are on there, up to the ones that I couldn't remember, which are a very, very long time ago. So in this presentation, we're going to examine how to leverage a portion of your address space on your network to monitor and mitigate attacks. We'll discuss custom logging from the Palo Alto Firewall to a Linux log server. We will discuss creating custom dashboards so that you can view these logs. And we'll also discuss how to turn those logs into a list of IP addresses and then take and import those IP addresses as dynamic lists into the Palo Alto, and then using them to block traffic from those addresses. So the idea being is that we're going to teach you how to automate blocking on your Palo based on a set of criteria that you make. And the beauty of this is you don't need any of the custom subscriptions to do this. If you have a Palo Alto Firewall, you can do this, regardless of what subscription you have. The technologies we're going to use in this are the Palo Alto Firewall, obviously. syslogng is the logging choice that I use. It's not the one you have to use, but Apache, PHP, and basically something Linux on that side is probably going to be your best choice. It may work on others, but today I'm going to show you how to do it with those. And so the question is, what is a darknet? Now, we're not going to confuse this by the Tor network or the darknet. A darknet is basically a section of address space on your network that has nothing on it, preferably something that has never had anything on it, that won't ever have anything on it, that you have no DNS records that will ever point to it or have ever pointed to it, and no servers on it, no references in any way, and probably the idea is to have something, a space, some address space, that there's no good reason for anyone ever being there, okay? So what we're going to do with it is we're going to catch those automated scans. So if somebody comes in and they use Nmap and then scan your network, there's a couple of different ways that can happen, right? You can go forward to backwards, backwards to forwards, or random. Random's kind of hard to catch in any reasonable amount of time, but if they go forwards or backwards, then the idea is you could catch them quicker than maybe they get to some of the internal stuff that you may not want them to see, okay? So the way you build a darknet is first you're going to determine how large of a darknet space to build. Depending on how big of a network you're working with, you may be able to work with just a single /24. If you're talking about a really large network, you may want to do some more of that. Basically, it's whatever you have to spare. And how do you build it out? Well, the idea is to build it out in such a way that you're going to see the traffic coming in. But there's another interesting thing that happens is maybe you have somebody who's scanning internally on your network. So you may also want to consider building it out in private space on your network. Now, usually when I look at it, I say, okay, when I've designed mine, I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll put a darknet right at the beginning of my network, a darknet at the end of my network, and what the heck, let's put one right in the smack dab middle, okay? It's kind of a guessing game. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just strategy. How do you think you're going to be able to catch someone scanning your network? So there's not really a wrong way to do this. It's just, okay, if I'm seeing scans on my network, where am I probably going to see them first? Okay? What if your address space is not contiguous? A lot of you are going to run into this problem. Hey, we got a bunch of address space, but it's all over the board. Really just design it whatever you think is the best thing for you, however you think it's going to use it best. But even if you have non-contiguous public address space, you're probably using contiguous private address space in your network. So utilize that. Be smart about how you build those out. Plan it wisely. So the very first thing that we're going to talk about is what to do for part one. You're going to create a darknet zone in the Palo Alto. Now, for those of you who use the Palos, you know that there's lots of zone capabilities within the Palos to define, and you can create rules based on those zones. Now, in this case, we want its own specified zone. We're going to call it darknet, and then we're going to tie it to a specific interface, and basically give an address to it. And now you may tie it to multiple interfaces, right, and give it multiple addresses. But ultimately, we're going to tie it to that interface, or we might create multiple interfaces that are tied to that same zone. However you want to do it, like I said, there's not a lot of wrong ways to do this. The idea is the same. Then you're going to want to create a syslog server profile. Once you've created that syslog server profile, it allows you to push the data, the logs, in a very particular format. So we can say, hey, I want a custom log format that looks like this. So you can say, I've got a threat, and if you're using threat subscription, you could do something like this and use the threat. If not, if you don't have any subscriptions, basically you're looking at traffic, right? So you're going to say scan from source to destination. And then we want the protocol, the port, and the application if there's an application detected by the Palo. Okay? Now this is really crucial because building it in a format that both you can parse and both looks good on a dashboard can be very helpful to you as you're looking at these logs. Okay? All right? And you want to make sure that it's not just pushing it in its normal format because, one, it might be more difficult to parse. It gives you a lot more information than you probably need. And two, it doesn't look pretty on a nice dashboard unless you reformat and do a whole lot of more work. So you could do it that way, but you're going to have to spend a lot more time on it. So once again, in real big letters, we're in the traffic, we're going to say scan from $SRC to $DST. And then I just put a bar in there, protocol, destination port, and application. Now, like I said, all of these slides are going to be on my website, so you don't have to take pictures if you don't want to. It'll be easy to follow from that point. So at that point, you're going to create your own custom log forwarding. You're going to create a log forwarding profile that says, hey, I have this log forwarding profile that we're going to later attach that's going to reference the syslog server profile that you created earlier. Okay? Once that is done, at the very, very end, you're going to want to create a policy that goes in and says, at the very end of your policies, you're going to say, we're going to catch all the traffic that hits those darknet scanners before it's allowed. So we're going to let everything through that's already explicitly allowed, and then anything else, which there shouldn't be any openings to your darknet, we're going to create a policy. We're going to call it darknet scanners. We're going to say, okay, if it comes from the outside, or if you're working with a firewall on the inside, you may want to say, if it's coming and it's hitting the 192 or 10 or any of the private address space, you may change this. But right now we're working with public address space, so we know it's probably going to come from the outside. You could also say, it comes from any zone. That way, if it comes from the inside or the outside, it's going to catch this rule. Okay? In this case, I said outside, but it could be any of those zones. So, and then the most important part is it's going to the zone darknet. So we go to actions, we're going to deny it. We automatically are going to deny it. We don't want it to do anything. But then that's where we go in, we set our log forwarding to that darknet scanner, to that log forwarding profile. So now any bit of traffic that comes into the Palo tries to hit that network, it's immediately going to say, okay, you get pushed over to this log forwarding profile that gets pushed to this syslog server that we've built for this purpose. Or even a regular syslog server that you use by your organization, and you've created a rule that it funnels that log into a file. So this is what it looks like in syslogng. So right now, in syslogng, you should be getting logs that look something like this. Scan from, where it's coming from, where it's going, what type of traffic, is it UDP, is it TCP, what port, and what application if the Palo detected it. Now, in most of these cases, the Palo is not going to detect the application because it needs to see the handshake. So you're not going to see that a lot because in most cases it has to actually see the handshake. So we're going to create a filter that's going to send all those logs into one file, because otherwise it's going to see it's stuffed in syslogng in your regular log file and mixed with everything else. So we're going to create a source that's based on UDP, and then a destination, which is the file darknet.log. Okay? And we're going to grant it owner, root, and group www-data. And we'll tell you, I'll show you why it's important that we actually give it to the web user later. And then we're going to create a filter. Basically, we're going to say if it comes from that firewall, you can do this. Now, if it's not the only thing you have coming from that firewall, you may want to do something more like what you have at the bottom, which basically says, if it comes from this firewall and it says scan from or message threat from, which is why we created that custom language in the log forwarding, then we're going to stuff it into that particular darknet log. Okay? We tie it all together with a log declaration, which is darknet log. We do your source, the filter, and the destination. And in the end, you should have a file show up that looks like that says darknet.log. Okay? And then, of course, you want to set up log rotate, otherwise that log will become insanely large and fill up your firewall. So when you're done, when you're seeing the log rotates, you should see something like this. And based off of, based off this script that we've set here to do a log rotate, I'm showing only 14 days. Now, you could do more than that if you wanted to. The challenge is that depending on how many things you have funneled into this, how many IP addresses are actually scanning you each day, which are probably, if you're like me, a whole heck of a lot, then this is going to be a lot of addresses. And your Palo is probably not going to be able to handle 14 days worth of addresses. Okay? You're probably only looking at a couple days worth of addresses, and maybe some for historical purposes. So you'll see 14 days worth of logs, and this is what we would do on the Apache side. And I don't know why that slide is in there at all. Okay, if you go to supertechguy.com/training, you'll also find this log-.tar.gz file, which contains the code, okay, that basically gives you a dashboard that looks just like that, okay, so that you can put this up on a screen and show exactly what's happening on your network. In our case, we actually took, and we have some other dashboards that are above this, and down below it just scrolls through and shows us who's currently attacking us or scanning us. Now, the cool thing is that you can also funnel back from your other firewalls as they detect these attacks. You can funnel back those same exact syslog packets back into that same darknet file, and then you'll also see which ones are actually getting blocked as they're coming through. So you see the scan come through, and then you see it getting blocked later on. Okay, so this is the particular file that we've got that basically is going to go through and create a list that you can then take off of that darknet log. Okay, I know this is kind of rough. It's a lot of technical detail. You're going to take that darknet log, and then you're going to push it into a file, a text file, that then the Palo Alto can actually understand, because the Palo looks at when you're going to create a dynamic list. You're going to say, okay, A dynamic list is basically a text file of IP addresses. That's all it is. But if you try to feed that darknet log into it, it's not going to have a clue what to do. You need a list of just the IP addresses that are in that log, and the unique ones. You don't want it to repeat. You don't want the Palo to do more work than it needs to do. Okay? So the idea is you're going to say, okay, on page Z. Now the beauty of this is it allows you to do multiple days worth of logs. So say you want to take and I want to see yesterday's logs, and I want to import those also into the Palo and use it to block Tuesday's worth of logs. Okay? You can do that. So the idea is you go in and you say, okay, this is PHP code that will go in and basically run the script pass-through, run the command pass-through, which is going to basically, whatever it sees on the command line, it's just going to pass it back to Apache, through PHP. Whatever that output is. So in this case, we're going to cat varlog.log, and then we're going to pipe it to a program called awk. Now awk will take and filter it in a specific way. And in this particular case, awk is looking at it and saying, okay, I want to print field number 7, okay? And I want to print a /32 at the end. So basically what we're doing is we're saying field number 7 happens to be the IP address where the attack or the scan is coming from. Okay? And a /32 is what Palo is expecting because it has to see it in a CIDR format. Okay? You can't just feed an IP address there. You've got to actually feed a CIDR formatted network address. And this happens to be a network of 1. Okay? Then we're going to sort it in order. All right, so we have all the IP addresses sorted in order, and then we're going to run unique, which is going to take and limit it down to just 100% just the unique IP addresses in that list. Does that make sense? So ultimately, what you'll get is something that looks like this. Okay? And you'll see just the unique IP addresses that have actually scanned your darknet. Once you have that list, then there's a lot of power that comes with that. Now, you'll notice that the other ones, if it's page 1, it says go to darknetlog.1, and if it's something else, then go to darknetlog. And then $page, so whatever that is, whatever page you're asking for, .gz. And you notice everything past that is going to be GZ, and it's going to be GZ compressed. Okay? So you've got to use zcat instead of just cat. All right, so that's why that script looks the way it does. You're going to get a list that looks like this, and then you're going to go back to the Palo. And what you're going to do on the Palo, and you can do this on all of the firewalls in your organization, this is the beauty behind it, is that within whatever you set as your repeat, which in my case I set it for 5 minutes, so somebody comes in, they scan one of these darknet addresses. Within 5 minutes, that IP address is blocked on every single firewall in my organization. Done. Automated, complete. Okay? All right, so we're going to create an IP list, an external dynamic list, and it's an IP list, and then we're going to point it directly, the source, directly at that page that we just created. Okay? Now in this case, it's a PHP script, but it shows up as a text file when it gets pulled. And then I want to pull it every 5 minutes. Okay? And then I'm going to take those dynamic lists and I'll maybe create another one. So for instance, I'm going to have one that's going to be current, which is what's happening today, one that's going to be what happened yesterday, and one that's going to be what happened the day before. And you can do as many as these as you want to, up to the point that you have to look at how many external dynamic lists or how many IP addresses can your Palo handle in external dynamic lists. Because there is a limitation, and you can't do 30 days worth. You can probably only get away with a few days worth. Okay? And basically, that first one, we know, the current one, we know we want to pull that up every 5 minutes and refresh it. The other ones, we know we only need to pull it once that day because it's not going to change what happened yesterday. Okay? But the beauty behind this is now we know that we've got 3 days worth of blocks. So you scan our network, okay, you're going to be blocked for at least 3 days in this case. You may configure your firewall differently and maybe do more than 3 days or less, depending on what your constraints are. Okay, now we're going to create that other syslog profile that I talked about. These are the blocked attacks. All right? So we're going to go in, we're going to create the exact same thing, send it to the exact same server, except this time, in the traffic log, I'm going to say attack has now been blocked from source to destination using this protocol, this port, and this application. And then I like to, at the end, reference where is this block actually coming from? Because we have other ways that we pull blocks from that are automated, and darknet's just one of them. So in this case, I put DRK at the end, so I know this is why this attack was blocked, what actually blocked it. So if I ever need to go back and say, why is some traffic not working? I can look through this log file and say, oh, that's why it's not working. Okay? And then we're going to create that custom log forwarding once again, tie it back to that blocked attack, and set that up. And then we're going to create a block based on those lists. Now this would go at the very, very beginning of your firewall, that you're going to say, hey, I want to block darknet scanners. If you're using Panorama, it makes it really easy just to push this all out as the very, very beginning of your lists. On all of your access lists for your rules, you can set up a rule that will just go out to everything on your network. Okay? And then you're going to reference any time it comes from these sources. And it comes from any interface, any zone, to any of those source addresses, those external dynamic lists that we just created. Okay? And then we're going to take, at the end, we're going to say we're going to deny it again, and we're going to do a log forwarding to a blocked attack. And that's all it is. So, I covered that in 20 minutes. And maybe I went way too fast. But let me tell you the rundown of this. We've been running this, the last time I did this presentation 3 years ago, we had been running it for about a year. We had no issues. We've now been running it for 4 years. We've still had no issues. None. I haven't had, except for when I've had people get curious and start to play on my network, I have never seen legitimate traffic blocked by this, which tells me something, because that was one of the biggest things that we were concerned about. And it's probably one of the biggest things in your mind. Okay, so if I set an automated blocking to a darknet based off of traffic that hits the darknet, what is that going to break? This is the thing, is nobody should ever be talking to that space. Like I said, you want to build this space in such a way that nothing's ever been on it, nothing's pointed at it, there's no reason for anyone to ever be there. And as long as you can do that, and you have the capability to do that, you should have no issues with this. Now, is that a guarantee? No, nothing's guaranteed. But I can tell you that we've had great success with it, and the beauty behind it is we look at this traffic every day, and we go, okay, there just goes. You see somebody come in and start scanning the network, and then suddenly it's all blocked, and it's blocked for 3 days. Okay? And do we know that it's definitely blocked attacks or stopped somebody from hacking on a network? I don't know. But it's just one more thing, right? It's one more thing. So what questions do you guys have? And then I'll go down, and you guys can call it a day, because you probably want to go get your families, or if you're coming to family night or not.
You said all the slides are available on supertechguy.com?
Yes. So if you go to supertechguy.com, you go to training, all the slides will be there. I'll get those posted tonight, along with the code. So I'll make the code downloadable, and you can get that and implement it and play with it.
How many IPs do you see a day?
Oh, y'all. Enough that it takes a while to scroll through the page. Okay, let's just say it's a lot. I haven't actually counted them, for a very, very long time. And I could possibly get in and count it at this point, but let's just say it's a crazy amount. There's a hand back here somewhere. Yeah.
When you made your syslog server profile, where did you link to? Back to Palo, or?
So the syslog server profile, it's pointing at a Linux box that's running syslogng. And so we use, that's the one I'm most familiar with. These instructions should work just fine for syslogng to set it up. You could use other syslog servers and be just fine. That's just the one I like the most. Yeah.
What do you use for your dashboard?
For the dashboard, it's just Apache PHP. That refreshes. It's got some. It's now built into it. That has some auto refresh right in the code. It's not doing. I think we did. I think it's running Ajax now at this point, to be honest with you. But yeah, it's just Apache PHP. It ends up on a big TV on the wall. Yeah. Yes. Oh, absolutely. If you threw some UDP traffic at it and did something like that, yeah, you might have something like that happen. In fact, we talked about this very thing last time. So, yes, is that a possibility? Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, with any of these types of things, anything automated, you're going to run into those types of challenges, right? Especially if somebody figures out where the crap you put that, right? So it just opens up a can of worms. And if that happens, we're going to have to deal with it. Absolutely. Yeah. With what? We do. Yep, we do. I'm not saying that you should use this in lieu of anything else. It's just one more thing. One more thing to add to it. Yeah.
So working with UETM, do you tell them where your dark zone is so that they don't randomly send a ping in there and all of a sudden you block UETM?
No.
I've caught some traffic coming from them into a couple spots in our network, so I'm just curious.
Well, actually, I'm trying to remember if we ever set up some, I think we might have set up some custom allow rule or something. I think we did run into that one time, but at the beginning the answer was no, we didn't. But I do believe we did run into that because they started doing some funky scanning at one point. I do remember that now. Like I said, it's been 3 years since I gave this presentation, so. Yeah. Yes. Most of that does, yes. But we have had some internal scanners that have gotten hit by the private space. Not very often. It's rare. Yeah, I mean, I have a massive network. It's probably the biggest network in southern Utah, but it's rare. Okay, yeah.
Do you have any allows for like the vulnerability scanners that you have on your internal network?
Yes, we do have some exceptions. So we do have some exceptions that are allowed through that automatically do not get whammied. Yeah. Yeah.
Do those exceptions look like rules above that darknet rule that says allow anything from our internal scanner, or do you?
They could be either way. I think the way we actually, the code that I gave you is probably an old version of the code. I'm thinking it's in the code if I remember right. But you could do it either way. You could say, yeah, you could make exceptions right in the rule if you wanted to even. So, yeah. Yeah. Usually scans are done continuously. There are, Nmap does have some flags that you can say, scan this at random. That's really hard to catch in any reasonable period of time. But usually if you've just got a script kiddie going through, or just somebody's just lazily scanning your network, it's contiguous. So front and back, something in the middle, something like that. You just kind of plan accordingly. Does that help? Okay. Yeah. How quick does that happen? It doesn't take very long. We just have to go in and make an exception for it. We can have it done in about 30 seconds or so. And then we usually take that exception off afterwards, or assuming that it's not going to happen again. If it's something that's reoccurring, we can leave it in. Anything else? Okay, thank you very much.